In this lecture, we're going to look at using the tabular environment, learn about tables, floats, and how to make references. I'm going to start with my template. Same template that I used in the last lecture. I'll give this the title Tables, Floats, and the Tabular Environment. So this is what we're going to focus on in this lecture. Alright, so let's learn to make tables. We'll start with the tabular environment. The tabular environment is a nested environment that you create just like we did with the lists. In this case, we want to begin the environment tabular. Of course, whenever we begin an environment, we need to end it as well, so we'll end tabular. The tabular environment requires an extra input, in curly braces again, and this is where you determine how many columns are going to be in your table and whether those columns are left aligned, centered, or right aligned. So I'm going to create a table with two columns that are both left aligned. To do that, I'll put two L's, so one left aligned for each column. Now I have my environment set up, and I'm going to use the description text that we had before, where we had name, subject, and grade. In the tabular environment, instead of using the item tag, to separate the columns we use the ampersand sign. So after I type the text that goes in my first column, I'll put the ampersand sign and then type the text that goes in my next column. To tell LaTeX that you are done with that row, you will use two backslashes. So there's my first row. My subject will be writing with LaTeX. And again, I ended that with two backslashes. And then grade and sign for the next cell, you can call it if you're familiar with Excel or other spreadsheet software. Grade A+, and we'll end that line. So let's typeset the document and see what we have so far. I don't see any warnings or errors coming up, so all is well there. And here's the PDF that was created. And we have a tabular environment. So you can see that the columns lined up, left aligned. If I want to change that to center the columns, I can replace the L's with C's for center. Run it again, and now each column is centered. Now normally in a tabular environment, you'll see some boxes around the cells, or lines around the rows and columns. To get lines around the columns, I'm going to use Shift and then the bar symbol that is above the backslash key to create a bar. So this is just, it should be just above your return key or your enter key, and you might have to hit Shift to create that bar. So that's a vertical bar. So what I'm saying now to LaTeX is I want a vertical bar at the left of the column, between the columns, and at the right of the columns. If I run this again, now I see the vertical bars have appeared. If you want horizontal bars, then you need to use a special tag called hline for horizontal line. And you want to put that anywhere you want to see a horizontal bar in your table. So now I see horizontal bars. I can also put them at the top and the bottom of my table. Run that again. And now my table is completely surrounded with lines for the different cells. Of course, you can also do double bars, both vertically. Here I'll put vertical bars between the two columns, and horizontally by adding an additional H line. And we'll see what this looks like. Typeset that, and now we have double bars. So I'm going to take out the additional horizontal lines in the middle because that didn't really look great. Run that again, and I'll leave it like this. So you can play with the different lines and lining things up, but this is essentially how the tabular environment works. So the next thing we might want to do is put this tabular environment in a table. Now this is optional, and we'll talk about why you might want to create a table. A table is a floating environment, and you can wrap your tabular environment inside a table, so box within a box again. We're nesting blocks of code. You can wrap the table tags, so begin table, around your environment. So I have begin table and end table. Now when you create a table like this, and you'll see in the next lecture the same is true for figures, this is what we call a floating environment in LaTeX. So LaTeX is going to find the best place to put this table in your document. But you can give LaTeX some tips on where you would like to see the table placed in the document. You do that within square brackets, and you put the tips in the order of your preference. So preferentially, I would like to see the table placed here, exactly where I have asked to have it placed. But in some documents, and if you've worked with a word processor, you know that sometimes putting the table exactly where you want it leaves blank spaces on your page. And so LaTeX tries to put it in a place that is going to make the entire document look better. So if your next preference is to put it at the top of the page, you can put a T here for top, or the bottom of the page, a B, or P, which says take this table and put it on a separate page with all the floats. And so here I've put my preferences in order. So LaTeX is going to first try to put the table here where I've specified. If it doesn't fit there, it will put it at the top of the next page. If it doesn't work there, the bottom of the next page, and so on. With a table environment, one of the benefits is adding a caption to your table. So I'll use a caption tag. And when you add your table caption, here you just want to put the text. LaTeX is going to handle the table numbering, and we'll look at that in a minute. So I'm just going to call this table my gradebook, and that'll be the caption for my table. I also want my table centered. So in order to center my table, I'm going to use a centering environment. So again, I'm creating a nested environment, and I'm going to say begin center. And with every begin tag, I need an end tag, so end center. And then in the middle of that centered environment, I can copy and paste my tabular environment. So instead of typing this again, I'm just going to copy my entire tabular environment, and I'm going to paste it in between these two center tags, so I'm putting it in that box. And then finally, before you close your table tag, you can add a label to your table, and we'll look in a second what this label does for you. I have a convention for naming my tables, and my convention is to write tab, colon, and then some name that I'll use to identify the table. So here I'll say grades. But you can create whatever label you want and come up with your own convention for being able to keep track of what your different tables are called. And we'll run this again. And notice the first thing that I see is warning labels may have changed. So remember, every time you see a warning, typeset again, the warning went away. And you can see the results of the PDF. So when I just had a tabular environment, my table looked like that. Well, here, my tabular environment looks the same, but I now have table 1, which I did not type. That was added automatically by LaTeX. And the caption for my table. And of course I centered it, so now it's centered on the page. So let's go back and see why we added this label. And this is one of my favorite things about using LaTeX, is how it handles referencing and numbering things for you. So I'll create another subsection here and call it references. Alright, so now I'm typing along in my document, and I want to reference back to the table I created. Now normally I would have to keep track of the numbering and say, put the actual number of the table here, but I don't want to have to keep track of that because I may very well go back and change the order of my tables, move them to different places, but I always want to be able to refer to the correct table. So what you want then is a tag called ref. So ref is a reference to a label. So I have created a label on my table, and now I want to refer to that table, and so I use the reference tag ref and type the same text that appears in the label. So now you see why I've come up with a convention to identify what my tables are. So now anywhere in my document, if I type ref tab grades like this, it is going to get replaced with 1 because it's the first table in my document. Another tip here, if we don't want table to appear on one line and the number 1 to appear on the next line, we can use this tilde before ref. This is telling LaTeX that the word table and whatever number gets generated by this tag should appear on a line together. So LaTeX will align your text so that they appear on a line together. So let's run that again. And I see, you can see my grades in table 1. So notice that the number 1 was created by this ref tag. And sometimes you may have to run LaTeX twice for that to work. So you can create tables anywhere in your document. You can refer to tables before and after the table is created as long as you have this label. So if I want to go back up here to my tabular environment section and say, this is the tabular environment for the table shown in table ref tab grades. I can typeset this now, and I can see the text. This is the tabular environment for the table shown in table 1. So you can put that reference before or after where you've inserted the table in the document. So in conclusion, now I know how to create basic tables. There is actually a lot more details into creating advanced tables. You can have text spanning multiple columns, you can have text spanning multiple rows, and this is something we'll touch on later in the course. But for now, you're able to create a basic table. And keep in mind, if your goal is just to line text up in columns, just simply use the tabular environment. The only reason you would want to use the table environment is if you wanted your tabular block of code to actually have a caption, be numbered, and be able to reference it. I also notice that the line for the top of your tabular environment kind of ran into this paragraph a little. These things are uncommon in LaTeX. Typically things will line up properly. Certainly when you use the table environment, they do. But here we want to figure out why these are showing up too close together. And it's because we have this paragraph followed by this other section, and this section happens to have a line above it. So how do we fix that? There's a number of different ways to fix that. Your first instinct might be to add an additional space here and typeset the document again. But recall we talked previously that LaTeX ignores white space. So you can add as many spaces here as you want, and LaTeX simply going to ignore that. So I need to find a way to push this tabular environment down. One way to do that, certainly not the only way, but a good thing to know, is to use the VSpace tag. VSpace stands for vertical space. And with the VSpace tag, you want to specify how much space you want to add between what appears above the VSpace tag and what appears below it. And here I'm just going to say 0.5 centimeters for half a centimeter. There's a lot of different types of measures you can use there. But that's one way to do it. So now I've pushed that table down a little bit. Another tag that you can use that also works is small skip. Small skip basically says to skip a little bit of space. And notice that it skipped a very little bit of space. I can also do a big skip. And notice big skip pushed it down quite a bit further. And so now if we're satisfied with our work, we can stop.